This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. Find Your Dream Job is brought to you by Top Resume. Top Resumes help more than 400,000 professionals land more interviews and get hired faster. Get a free review of your resume today. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. An employer wants to hire you. You think the offer is a good one, but how can you be sure? Gaby Rosenada Valdes is here to talk about the questions you must ask before accepting a job offer. She's the talent manager at Planned Parenthood Columbia-Willamette. Gaby specializes in talent management, compensation, and employment law. She also has a master's degree in human resources management from the University of Southern California. Gaby joins us from Portland, Oregon. Well, Gaby, here's where I want to start. We're going to talk about a set of specific questions you recommend every candidate ask when there's a job offer on the table. But let's step back for a moment. Why is it important to have a conversation about a job offer at all? Why not simply say yes?
Yeah, well, we know that the job search process is really stressful and exhausting for most folks. And when you finally receive an offer, whether it's the first of, whether it's one of many or the first you've received in a search, it can be tempting to accept right away and just be done with it. But not every job posting or interview process is the same, and many will not provide some of the crucial information that you need before accepting a job. So you want to use every opportunity you can to ask questions and ensure you get those essentials answered before you commit. And interviewers may not be able to answer your questions right away, and that's okay because you can always schedule a post-offer call. But that really is your opportunity to get some of that detailed information that could make a big difference in the role that you are going to take.
What happens, Gaby, to a candidate who accepts a job offer without asking questions? What kind of consequences do you see?
I think you can end up feeling a lot of disappointment or regret if you don't ask those questions ahead of time. If you wait and then try to negotiate after you've accepted an offer, there may not be as much room to accept those changes, or things may feel like they're kind of set in stone and you're stuck. So to avoid feeling that way, you want to ask when you have the opportunity and when it's still a negotiation process.
You mentioned a moment ago that it can affect your status at the job that you're considering, but what about the long-term effect on your career if you don't, if you simply accept an offer without questions?
I think if you accept an offer without asking questions, you may not really understand what is important to you in a role or what is going to make a difference down the road. When you get comfortable with asking these questions in the job offer process, you really start to identify what's important to you as a candidate and what are you willing to accept or compromise on, and what is a hard no. And so really getting comfortable with this and seeing yourself being confident in asking questions and knowing that it is totally okay that you are interviewing the org as much as they're interviewing you. I think it makes you a better, candidate, and you really are able to kind of hone in on the orgs and the questions that matter instead of hoping that those answers will come later on.
And by orgs, we mean organizations, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. In terms of employers, in your experience, I mean, you hire people regularly at your organization. You have a long history as a recruiter. Do you expect candidates to ask questions about job offers?
Absolutely. Yeah. Employers want you to ask questions. And, I think sometimes folks feel uncomfortable, and there is kind of a social pressure to not offend the interviewers or to seem ungrateful for an offer that you've received. And I know I personally feared that early in my career that if I asked too many questions, the interviewers wouldn't like me anymore, or they would move on to other candidates. And that's just not the case most of the time. We want folks as interviewers and hiring managers to ask questions and to really show that they're invested and considering an offer seriously. And being on both sides, we understand that these are big decisions. So it's totally okay, and we should feel empowered to ask questions in a way that's respectful, considerate of the process, and ensuring that they're questions that haven't already been answered.
What do you think as a hiring manager or your colleagues who do recruitment when a candidate doesn't ask questions about an offer that's on the table?
Yeah, I think not asking questions sometimes comes across as maybe not being interested or really caring about the specifics of the role. And that's not always true. Sometimes folks are just really eager and excited and, in a position where they just want to accept. But really taking the time to ask those questions will help everyone be on the same page about expectations or, what can and can't flex within the role.
Well, let's turn to your list of specific questions you recommend every candidate ask when that job offer has been made. Uh, Number one on your list is you need to understand the total benefit package. Why is it important to ask about questions about the total benefit package, Gabby?
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important areas of questions that we need to ask about because typically offer letters will include information about a base rate and you may get some very brief information about benefits, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So, for example, one of the questions I always like to ask is how was this salary offer calculated? Is it open for negotiation? Understanding that not every company uses the same process for an offer and there may not be room for negotiation, but you at least want to understand. And if the salary was calculated based on education and experience, that way you can, ensure that all of your relevant education and experience was taken into account and that you're being given an offer that's fair. Asking this question of how is the salary calculated will also help you understand more about the compensation structure. And you can also ask about that directly. So you can ask, how are raises determined? Are they tied to performance reviews? What is the cycle for increases? And that will give you an idea of not just your base rate, but what your compensation will look like in your career with this company.
Salary, of course, is a huge part of any compensation and benefits package. What about other benefits beyond salary? What do you recommend that candidates ask about when a job offer's been made?
Yeah. I think in terms of compensation, it's also a good way to frame it could be, can you tell me a little bit more about the compensation or total reward strategy or package? Because there are other benefits that we don't always think about. For example, I worked with a job seeker in the past who was offered a position that would require them to pay for parking off site and then have to commute to their role because there was no parking on site. And when the job seeker was offered the position, this was a kind of a challenge for them, and they weren't sure how to approach it. And so they used that opportunity to ask about potential parking passes, permits, or discounts that could be offered to offset those costs. And they were able to successfully negotiate for that. So it is important to explore, things like internet stipends, reimbursements for mileage or parking, these kind of supplemental benefits that I think make a huge difference in your experience.
Often, an employer may offer to provide written information about benefits. I think the best example that comes to mind is health insurance, if it's provided. Uh, how much written material do you recommend a candidate ask to see when considering a job offer?
I think as much as possible, whatever is appropriate to get, it doesn't hurt to ask for things like the full benefits package because in sometimes a company will offer you a benefits summary, which just has like at a glance a brief overview. But personally, I like to know the details. So if the company can provide me with the full benefits guide and I can see, for example, information about retirement, what is the contribution rate? Is there matching that the company offers? How long until I'm vested? That kind of information is not typically on a summary. but it does really impact my experience as a candidate. So, asking for the information that is critical to your role is okay. I think another document that isn't always presented right away is, for example, like a collective bargaining agreement if the position is unionized. And that the collective bargaining agreements offer so much critical information. So if you're able to get a copy of that along with your offer, it's a great time to review and see, how that impacts your interest in the position.
Well, terrific. We're going to take a break, Gaby, and stay with us. When we come back, Gaby Rosenada Valdes will continue to share her advice on the questions you must ask before accepting a job offer. Here's a question to ask yourself before you apply for your next job. Is your resume as good as it could be? Go to maxlist.org/top resume. The experts at Top Resume will review your resume for free. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. Learn how you can make your resume better right away, or hire Top Resume to do it for you. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. Now let's get back to the show. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Gaby Rosenada Valdes. She's the talent manager at Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette. Gaby specializes in talent management, compensation, and employment law. She also has a master's degree in human resources management from the University of Southern California. Gaby joins us from Portland, Oregon. Now, Gaby, before the break, we were talking about your sets of questions you say every candidate should ask before accepting a job offer. I want to backtrack a bit and just ask you about the one of the benefits of asking these questions. I would imagine it can help you identify red flags for an employer, can't it?
Absolutely. Asking questions helps you identify red flags in the orgs or the cultures that you may or may not want to work in. So, for example, if I ask about an interviewer about performance review process and how performance is evaluated in the company, and the interviewer or hiring manager isn't able to give a clear answer in the moment or with follow-up, to me that would indicate that this is not a strength or priority in the company and maybe not something that they regularly talk about. Same with equity and inclusion. If I ask an interviewer and company about their commitment, what they are doing to really move forward in equity and inclusion work, and they're not comfortable with answering the question or really can't provide solid details, to me, that's a red flag and something that kind of helps me narrow my search. And when you repeat this process and you really ask these questions every time you're in a job search process, you'll really learn more quickly to identify what is the kind of org I'm looking for, what are the responses that I'm seeing, and when someone is responding in a certain way, what may that indicate about the company?
Okay. So it helps you in the end evaluate an offer, and I want to talk about evaluation in a moment, but let's go back to your list of questions. And I know another one that you always recommend candidate explore with an employer when an offer's on the table is to ask about culture and onboarding. What do you have in mind here, Gaby, and why is this important?
Yeah, I think this is so important because your first 90 days, 6 months in a role are so critical, and you want to ensure that you're supported and are able to really thrive in that time. So I always recommend asking about what onboarding looks like. What is expected in the first, the first week, month, 30, 60, and 90 days of employment? What kind of support will I receive? If there doesn't really seem to be a solid structure or plan, to me, that's a red flag. So I want to understand that ahead of time. Um, some other, kind of questions that you can ask to gauge culture or how employees are supported are about their equity and inclusion commitment. Again, you can ask, what kind of training opportunities will I be eligible for? Am I allowed to participate in professional development? Are there any resources for folks that want to move internally within the org? And their responses to these questions will tell you a little bit about how the company values employees or really what they see as priorities for onboarding.
And when you're encouraging listeners to ask about 30, 60, 90-day plans, you're not looking for the plan itself in this conversation. What's important is that there's a process. Is that right?
That is correct. What I'm personally looking for is um, an opportunity to first, understand the role. So time to review policies, to understand, how the processes work within the company. But I also want to see opportunities to network and engage with other stakeholders. So I always love when there are meet and greets in scheduled and prepared in those first few months, because especially in remote roles, it can be really hard to meet the folks that you're working with and to engage with different departments. So opportunities to learn from others, to network, and just time to get your feet on the ground, and also support from supervisors. All of those things I think are really valuable in those first few months. And you don't need to have the full plan, or I don't personally ask for the full plan, but I want to understand that there is a plan in place.
What is the benefit to a candidate who accepts an offer from a company that or an organization that has a 30, 60, 90-day plan in place when you do start, as well as offer the other onboarding activities that you described? How can that affect a candidate's success at that organization once they become a member of the staff?
Yeah, if there is no plan in place, uh, and really no way to ensure that this person is going to be successful, I think it can really make or break your experience. You may have a really hard time learning the ropes and understanding what your role is or how to, fit in this new company. And when there is a plan in place and there are ways to measure success and to understand what's working and what's not, and opportunities for feedback, I think anyone is more likely to succeed and feel supported. So it, I think, just shows a commitment from the organization that they want folks to, they want to meet them where they're at and help them grow into the roles instead of hoping for the best.
A final set of questions you recommend every candidate ask when they receive a job offer is to ask about probationary periods. Are probationary periods common for new employees in many organizations?
In my experience, they are fairly common. Not every company requires a probationary period, but if there is one, you definitely want to know about it, uh, because there are usually set guidelines that will determine whether you pass that probationary period or not. And so I always ask if there is one, and what happens during that time. So are there regular check-ins? Are there checklists or documents that will need to be signed off? And just knowing that time period, whether it's 90 days or 6 months. In my experience, probationary periods can also limit, if someone can take time off, or there are certain activities they can't engage in during that time, maybe take advantage of the retirement contributions or something like that. So you just want to understand and be prepared ahead of time, so that you're successful when you actually have to be in the probationary period.
How much detail do you recommend asking for when considering a job offer? How much detail about probationary periods? Do you want to know all the specific guidelines and deliverables, or do you simply want to know that there's a process and how you can learn more about it?
I recommend leaving the questions kind of open ended. I avoid yes or no questions because those are not going to give you as much information. Uh, but I think leaving it open, like, can you tell me a little bit about, if there is a probationary period, can you tell me about what that process looks like or what you're looking for success? And that way you can gauge what the employer is telling you. What are their values? What do they see as important? If I ask an open-ended question about, if I ask a yes or no question, like, do you have a good work-life balance in the company? Most likely the answer is going to be yes. But if I ask, how often does the team feel the need to work on weekends, or something that is more open, and then leave it to them, their answer is going to tell me a lot more about how the employees in the company really see that aspect.
Well, let's pull it all together, Gaby. You've had a conversation with an employer who's made you an offer, and you've asked about benefits, compensation, the culture, onboarding, the diversity, equity, and inclusion practices, and probationary periods. How do you take all this information and use it to evaluate the offer? What do you recommend?
Personally, I like to use this information to compare final offers. So if I am considering 3 different companies, uh, I like to kind of list these questions and answers in a little table to compare the offers and see overall what is the best package that is on the table. So perhaps, one company is offering a high hourly rate, but the benefits aren't great and there is no retirement contribution option. And, then I can compare that to another offer that may have a more robust package and onboarding, but perhaps not as high of an hourly rate. So I think it really just helps you kind of narrow your search and decide based on the factors that are important to you, not just the information that's being presented.
Well, it's been a terrific conversation, Gaby. Now, tell us, what's next for you?
With Planned Parenthood Columbia Willamette, we are really focusing on compensation. So we have been doing a lot of work, and I'm really excited to continue this pay equity journey and really just building transparency and competency for our employees and supervisors.
Well, terrific. I know listeners can connect with you on LinkedIn, and we'll include a URL to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And if they do reach out to you, I hope they'll remember to say they heard you on Find Your Dream Job. Now, Gaby, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about the questions you recommend every candidate ask before accepting a job offer?
I think if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say feel confident and know that it is okay to ask questions after you have received an offer. You should feel confident and okay to ask questions throughout the recruitment process, interviews, calls, and after you've received that offer, it is still okay to take your time and ask those questions. And the employer will most likely be very interested in answering them for you and taking that extra time because you have been identified. So, feel confident, know that you are interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. And these questions that you're asking are not burdensome. If they are important to your search and your career, then they are worth asking before you accept and commit to a job.
Make sure you never miss an episode of Find Your Dream Job. Subscribe to our free podcast newsletter. You'll get information about our guests and transcripts of every show. Go to maxlist.org/newsletters. Again, that's maxlist.org/newsletters. Next week, our guest will be Elena Giorgetti. She's a career coach who specializes in transitions, emotional intelligence, and mental health. Elena started her career as a recruiter in a Fortune 500 global consulting firm, and she's worked in both Europe and Canada. You may be in the workforce for 40 years or longer, and you'll likely stop working at times to care for family, go to school, or for other personal reasons. Join us next Wednesday when Elena Giorgetti and I discuss how to talk about resume gaps after a career break. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job. This show is produced by Max List. Susan Thornton Huff schedules our guests and writes our newsletter. Lisa Kislin-Barry Anderson manages our social media. Our sound engineer is Matt Fiorillo. Ryan Morrison at Podfly Productions edits the show. Dawn Mole creates our transcripts, and our music is by Freddie Trujillo. This is Mac Pritchard. See you next week.